So I was working with a startup for my second job as the first employee, and then I guess by the time I left, they had 30 people.
Before that, you were looking at some, images of people's breasts, right?
That's also a very interesting way to put it, but I was working on digital mammography using AI to detect cancer. Don't you talk about it like that.
You go IPO, and then you're onto your next adventure. Versus now, it's 5 to 10 years, I would say. I have a lot of friends who are just like holding onto their pre-IPO shares, working at these companies.
I guess I'll make my way to Sunnyvale at some point.
Do it as a personal trip first.
I just see we started recording, so maybe we just repeat everything again or something.
Okay.
Yeah. So basically, this is our first time using this new platform, Riverside.
Yeah.
So we've been using Zoom before, and the quality of video is kind of mediocre.
Yeah.
For podcasting.
For this.
Yeah.
You have to pay for this? I thought it was free.
No, it's not free.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well,
that's when you know.
Yeah.
It's getting serious.
Yeah. You need to get serious before you get more traction.
Absolutely.
Well, you're not good to have you here. Like you look good in that gilet.
I just spilled orange juice onto my shirt, so I have to put something over it very quickly.
Just to cover it.
Orange juice. Yeah.
Oh no. Yeah, very nice meeting you, Enoch. Heard so much from Johan from you. I wonder how you guys meet. Actually, I never heard that beginning story.
Johan, you want to go first?
I met Enoch through his then girlfriend, now wife.
Just say wife.
Livia, who studied at LC, and she went to this startup accelerator at LC, and I just met her there. And through her, I met Enoch. He's a cool guy, and cool software engineer / data engineer. And ML.
I met Johan through my now wife and then girlfriend, Livia, and I think the first time we ever met was like in LSE, like in Genden. So I wasn't really affiliated with LSE, right? But I thought it was a cool place, and then my impression of Johan is that he just does everything. Like he's like a CFA, right? Level 3, and
a pilot,
not chartered.
Pilot. Yeah. He's like a genius. Like I like people who like do a variety of things. So
same thing can be said about Enoch, but I guess you're not like thinking about startup at that time, right? You're more just trying to be a good engineer or manager.
Yeah. I think when we met, I was probably at my second job in the UK. I honestly can't remember when we met, but it's like my third job now in the UK. So I was working with a startup for my second job as the first employee, and then I guess by the time I left, they had 30 people.
Before that, you were looking at some images of people's breasts, right?
That's also a very interesting way to put it, but I was working on digital mammography using AI to detect cancer. Don't you talk about it like that. I was trying to help the NHS to process mammography faster.
Yeah.
I think a lot of companies are trying to do that, so that's going to be, the future.
I saw a news, I think a month ago, and it actually is helpful in early detection of breast cancer. And
exactly. A few professors at MIT as well did similar research on breast cancer early detections. They're really making huge improvements and getting accuracy so much better. Were you developing the model for them, or what kind of work?
No, I think when I joined, they've already had a pretty robust model. They were planning on doing like an FDA trial, so I was preparing the data set for the FDA trial. What's interesting is I actually graduated from a master's with medical imaging, but more specifically in pediatric CT scan, and how to use. Back then, they were still talking about GANs, right? So generative adversarial networks. How to use GANs to improve the performances of deep learning models. So like UNets and SegNets, right? How do you segment specific abdominal organs from it? So that was my master's thesis. And then I thought I would be doing more research work there, but turns out they already have pretty good research going on. Right. So I just started working on data engineering, and which is probably why I became who I am right now. But also, it made me realize like a huge part of ML is actually the data and data quality.
Right.
Yeah,
Gojek probably has some to share, right? Because you did some data work back at EY.
I've been working on data for a while. Not some data work. But anyway, I just totally resonate. Oh my God. So for anything model related or just ML, AI related, the first and actually the most important part is the data engineering part. Maybe I can attribute 50 or 60% of my work on any model to be the data engineering. I have to clean and to make sure it's in a good format. It really affects the end goal that we're trying to build. But I have actually never worked on any imagery related task at work, which is really interesting. My work has always been on NLP, natural language processing related topics.
Nice.
I work a lot on autism spectrum disorder and trying to identify basically signals or features that can build onto like a training program later on for kids and high functioning adults with autism. But totally very excited to hear more on the image side as well.
Well, what's interesting is it sounds like you've done something related to like medical, in particular with I don't know what you would classify autism, but I suppose like when I left the US, I was actually offered to do a PhD in brain imaging. Specifically, they want to predict the progression of dementia or Alzheimer's, and also I suppose people with schizophrenia, they want to look at the brain images and try to, by predict, probably monitor the brain activities. So it was very interesting. Sometimes I still think about it. What if I have taken that path of doing a PhD in the US? Because it was well funded, right? It was from Medical College of Wisconsin. So, pretty good medical school. They've got lots of images. So it's very interesting that you mentioned that you've done work on autism.
Why did you not take it?
It just takes a long time. It's 5 years, right? So, if I took it, then I wouldn't be here doing the podcast with you guys, and I wouldn't have met Zhao Han. I wouldn't have gotten married, right? I wouldn't have, I think my life would have been very different. And I always thought that had I done a PhD, I would probably still be doing the same thing that I'm doing right now. So why not start a little early? Earlier.
Just building on that 5 years, right? So I think one discussion I've been having in my top of my mind is about how long it takes for startups to build. Because when I grew up, right, like when you have to dial up.
When you grew up, aren't you like 20 or something?
Well, when I was in in the 90s and 2000, right? Like it's back then I've heard of a lot of startup people in the States, as well as some people in Beijing, and you do a startup, you get acquired in maybe 2 years, or you go IPO, and then you're onto your next adventure. Versus now, it's about I would say average is like 5 years, or 5 to 10 years. I would say I have a lot of friends who are just like holding on their onto their pre-IPO shares, working at these companies. So I know you are doing a startup now. So what's your take on the current risk reward of that? Because like it's not like it's more like you're marrying into the idea, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is an idea that I've always had, but I've always had many ideas, and none of them really like drove me significantly enough into, oh, I'm going to start a company for it. I might have built some websites for it, or I've built like a web app for it, and then I'm like, nobody's going to use it. But you never know. But this is one of those ideas where I have another friend who's my co-founder, and he just happened to be bothered by the same problem, which we're still in stealth, so unfortunately I can't disclose too much, but it's in the legal tech domain, right? So as you can imagine, right, there are just a set numbers of problems within the legal tech domain that we want to solve. So we just found out that it's quite a common problem. And so I think it just hit it off very quickly. But to answer your question, right, I feel like well, there are two factors impacting it. A, I still am very much working full time. So I have to work on my startup outside of the regular hours, i.e., I have to work on it like from, I don't know, whenever I get off work, right? So like 7 to 1 a.m., that's my startup time. And, if I work on it, over the weekends, then,
I've
that's
seen
my
you
startup
working
time.
like nonstop, like when
I make
sometimes
pull requests around 2 a.m. So that's the fun bit, but also it's a little frustrating for sure. Not because I think the U.S. environment could have been better for startups, or the cadence could have been faster, but I just feel like I also can have room for improvement while being in the UK for building faster. But to answer your question, yes, I do think US has better funding, and their startup systems or ecosystem is a bit more robust.
Right.
Just want to make sure. Where are you located? Are you located in London?
In London. Yeah,
okay.
West London.
Okay.
West London, to be exact. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. It's good to set like a location wise when you talk about investment.
Yeah.
I mean, I think like, well, the U.S. market is definitely better, but also I think it doesn't really matter where you build it, especially if you don't have employees.
Exactly.
But
it's quite flexible at the moment as well. I think me and my co-founder, we both have full-time jobs, so we're just kind of like, we'll build it and see where it goes, right? It's his first startup. It's my first startup, so I understood the risk, and I've joined startups before, so I kind of know the little caveats. Oh, we're going on to this cloud platform, so it's better to apply for credits, right, instead of billing monitoring, so that we don't accidentally get charged $20K overnight. So it definitely helps to have worked at a startup before, but I've also fully accepted the risk of not going anywhere.
I have a question, like follow up on your building process, because I know we had that discussion privately about should we use more LLM when building something? Should we not? How is that like? And then I was a little skeptical right before about using LLM for building the whole thing out, but then I saw some really impressive stuff called I think it's V0 from Vercel that basically just give you the whole front end, back end, in React and also CSS, Tailwind. So I don't know, like, what's your take on the whole LLM making LLM driven development, as well as maybe a little bit, on the offshoring?
Yeah, so I guess when you're saying it, you mean like using LLM as part of the development process, as opposed to wrapping my whole startup around an LLM, right? Because that's what a lot of people nowadays do as well, right?
But more as like from a lot of people use ChatGPT to fix some part of their code versus letting ChatGPT to generate the boilerplate, and you when you actually do the system design and everything, so it frees you from that.
Well, I was fortunate enough to have the full stack background. So when I was in the States, I worked for Northwestern Mutual for a year as a fresh grad. So, they're an insurance company, nothing truly exciting, but I think they're doing a ton of innovation work
Fortune
nowadays.
500.
So, Fortune 500, big company. And it was there when I learned about React and, Mongo Express Node, all those important things.
Yeah.
And they were kind enough to send me on a React bootcamp back then. So I actually have a little bit of that in the back of my memory of, this is how you do a website. This is how, you do front end, back end, right?
Right.
Middleware, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But I think using LLM, you should always have a very good context when using LLM as your main development tool. So especially with front end, right? You don't want to just jump in and be like, hey, make me a UI. And this does not look pretty enough, right? Move this component. So you should use more specific terms. So for example, when you prompt the LLM, you want to be using terms like, can you use this specific function in React Router DOM to achieve this functionality, right? So while a lot of people would disagree with me, I feel like a lot of prompt engineering is just being specific, right? So if you're specific enough with what you prompt the LLM, then you'll get the outcome. And also, right, I use LLM for part of my development cycle only for the first part. And I can tell you now, after I've gotten the website to work, I actually have gotten to a point where I don't need LLM. I use a little bit of Copilot, but I don't, go back and forth on ChatGPT.
You say the cadence is up after you use that, right? Like, it freed you from the actual implementation a lot more.
Well, it's just, I would say it saves me from spending time on Googling and reading documentation on how to get started. For me, it works because I'm a very implementation-oriented learner. But for people who are more theoretical, maybe LLM is not that helpful. Like, you need to read the actual documentation because, they hallucinate, right? So that's my take on it.
When you're debugging, are you still using Stack Overflow or you moved on to?
That's a very good question. I use a mix because I generally find that LLMs sometimes hallucinate quite badly, and they like to gaslight me, so it pisses me off. So I have to go back to Stack Overflow and be like, hey, these are real people, right? Giving real answers. So I use a mix, but I think nowadays, for the most part, I use Copilot within VS Code to debug things. But I'm also a bit more driven in the process, so I have picked up more of the pieces without actually using LLMs.
Right. There have been a debate saying that if, let's say, a high school student needs to learn the basics for computer science or coding in general, like data structures and algorithm, that kind of stuff, if the LLM has been doing so well to get them started on building any tool that they want. And from what you said, it seems like you still need like a foundation to have a general understanding, to have the structure and because from your previous job, you had the full stack experience, you were able to pick on the parts that you need and to have like a full storyline for how to build your product from the start to the end. So that makes sense. Do you think LLM in the future will be able to have that sense of understanding about how to help a person without any zero software engineering or knowledge background to start understanding the building parts of having a software or product?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think for that to work, we need to take care of two problems. I think the first problem is hallucination, right? So hallucination is the root of what breaks the trust between humans and LLMs or AI. Because right now, I think, and that's a problem that our startup has as well, right? Like being a legal tech startup, how do you make your users trust your output, right? Like what's written out on a contract or, on a case law that's set in stone. So you don't want the LM to tell you, hey, actually, you should pay the other party $50K when the contract only says £50, right? So that is a big problem. If that's being resolved, right, or mitigated, then perhaps then there will be a point where a high school student or even a primary school student can go to LLM and be like, hey, tell me about computer science, right? What does it mean? and then if it gives the actual output, then that would be great. They're talking about replacing teachers with AI, right?
Right.
But I find that a bit premature, I would say.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I'm
yeah.
finding an interesting parallelism between LLMs and autopilot in aviation, right?
Oh.
Yeah.
Because I think autopilot is invented in 1940 or something, and then so it's been almost a century of people using autopilot.
Sure.
And so what happens is that there's still people monitoring how autopilot works.
Yeah.
Right. So you have to
Yeah.
check if that was working as intended, and if when it deviates from what you actually want to do, you take it over.
Yeah.
And then sometimes on say on approach, when the plane auto lands, you have 2 or 3 autopilots working together to check that, hey, is everything working or not? So like it's not just one, but 3 systems.
Yeah.
And I find it similar to how I guess LLMs trying to, when you're building a system trying to work, is that you have maybe not only one LLM, but also others that have different sort of domain knowledge or training data, right?
Yeah.
So it can back each up. But maybe I guess like at the end of the day, there could be some human expertise to deal with these edge cases that are really out of bound.
Yeah.
But hopefully it'll get better.
Creating a new job family of LLM monitors.
Yeah.
Well, they already have like job titles for that, but they call it something else, right? Like I don't know, human specialists or teachers, right? But I don't know. I feel like for me, I genuinely have a knowledge, and I also have an interest in the knowledge, right? And that's not something that LLMs can drive. Like if you intrinsically have the drive to learn something, it it will help you in the long run, I think.
Right.
And the ability to ask questions, right? I think even LLMs can teach you everything. Right now, the way we interact with LLMs is you need to ask them questions. So how to ask good questions, right? Ask the right questions and be specific in that the LLM can tell you something useful. I think that's, regardless of what domain you're in, like you can be in marketing, right? Or you can be in, software engineering. If you can't ask good questions, it doesn't matter what you can get out of the LLM.
Yeah. I mean, I also find it interesting in terms of like what sort of knowledge is, it's more relevant outside of the, using LM is when, I guess, say, cracking lead code, right? Something that people do. Every day, almost. But LM can crack all those data structure and algorithms fairly easily. But then it doesn't do so well at doing system design or scalability or reliability or making some sort of decisions in regards to the business. Hey, should we prioritize, say, reliability but lower our throughput, or vice versa? And so I think that's still something that human could be valuable in a way.
Yeah, well, and I also believe they're engineered that way because they don't want to. Well, for example, ChatGPT doesn't want to bear the legal responsibility of telling a company, do this instead of the other thing, and then that costs monetary loss to a company, and they could get sued, right? So I think, and I don't know if this is true, I could be wrong, but I feel like a lot of the human I forgot what that's called, RLHF or something like that, like reinforcement learning with human feedback, right? In the loop or something like that. It's
RLHF
engineered to be very neutral in that, hey, so these are the 2 options or 4 options, right? They're equally valuable in each of these areas. So it doesn't put weight on one of them.
Yeah. I remember Johan was asking his second part of his question was regarding outsourcing or because of the rise of LLM and everything. And you work on several startups and you're building your startup. Do you think in the future your startup might be outsourcing tons of software engineering jobs to
It's
other
especially,
countries. Yeah.
I guess like every day I get hit up by people on LinkedIn or email saying, "Hey, we have a lot of engineers for outsourcing," and I think it's a hot topic now.
It's interesting you brought it up, right? I had to move like at least 100 messages from my inbox on LinkedIn to the other inbox because the focus inbox is supposed to be focused, right? But every single message is like, "Oh, you want to hire engineers?" I'm like, "No." Overseas, no. I'm just not hiring at the moment. I have nothing to hire for. But I think there is a trend, right? Obviously, it depends on the macros as well. Like if the economy is bad, right? Like people want to cut costs, they want to consider hiring outsourced engineers. My experience working with outsourced engineering is, I would say, a bit of a mix because I've had some really, really good engineers, like say from Europe, right? And they really know their craft. They're very, very passionate, right? Produce really, really good quality code. But I've also worked with some engineers from, I don't know, also from Europe or from other places as well, right? That creates code that creates a lot of tech debt, right? Zero documentation, no comments, right? Just 1,000 lines of code, and then
Love it.
they get the money and they did, right? But yes, the cost is cheap, but you also need to look at the hidden costs. So I think right now, right, for my startup, me and my co-founder are on the same page. I think we would weigh, sure, if it's significantly cheaper and we can find someone who's genuinely smart, and there are ways to test for it, right? Then we will hire that person, obviously, right? Just to save like quite a bit of money. But we are also not opposed to the idea of having one can do all engineer, and we pay him or her like a very good sum of money plus shares or whatever, to do everything that we need him or her to do. So I have mixed feelings about outsourcing.
Yeah. Right. As you mentioned, how do you test to identify good engineers?
Yeah. For me, right, I think what's interesting is a lot of people still seem to think leak code is a good way to test. And I don't think it's truly a fair way to test. I mean, I always tell recruiters that I'm not a big fan of leak code. I've done them before. I've done them in interviews, right? For me, it's more like drilling and pattern recognition. So you see a problem, you're like, oh, this is the problem. I'm going to do it, right? And there are tons of materials that teach you how to approach leak code. So in a way, right, you just prepare for it. So if you're a very good exam prepper, then you would essentially get the job. But I feel like if you give that person a task and maybe you say it's kind of on a trust basis as well, so you could argue that there's some flaws to it, but you say, hey, here's an assignment for you, right? This is going to be what you're actually going to be working on, and you have half a day to do it. Send it back to me by EOD today. I feel like that's a better measurement of how well that person can do. And what I do usually after that first stage of them completing is I get on a call with them for like 30, 45 minutes and have them walk me through what they've done. So that person has completed the assignment themselves, or at least have them have their friends write it and then try to understand what they wrote. But that's usually harder. And then you can see if they ask meaningful questions because you can question them, right? So what if I want you to turn this into a microservice? What would you do, right? Or how do you make sure, right, this is being processed efficiently? Or what if I want to implement multiprocessing? Yada, yada. Like there are tons of ways you can twist a problem. So these are the two ways.
Right. Yeah. I mean, there are still like things I would say, like basic things that you can test out of leak code. Say, oh, can you reverse a linked list? Right. Well, depends on what language, right? Well, it depends on what language, right? Like if you're in some like maybe like C++ or Rust, like you actually have to like know the differences, like pointers and stuff. But like if you're doing Python every day, then like what's the point? And by the way, like if you're actually implementing something, there's probably like a bit better library. It's way more efficient than whatever you come up with a leak code solution. I guess a lot of that is more down to the intentionality of doing something, right? Like, to instruct the LLM to do some work, or to have the purpose of building something. Like I guess you want to find people that with a passion to learn, to read, to seek excellency in whatever product they build and ship, I guess.
Yeah. I guess for me, it's also how, like you said, right, how passionate they are about learning.
Right.
Because I'm also, like you said, right, I feel like languages, people can just pick it up, like if they're truly curious, right?
Yeah.
I know like a lot of good engineers, they maybe excel at one or two languages, but if you show them a new language, they'll be like, so here is how I would learn it, and here is how I would use this to tackle this particular problem, and they can handle it with ease. Versus a domain expert that cannot learn, I would value the former, right?
Yeah.
I wonder if it's a difference between hiring in a startup versus hiring in big tech. It seems
probably.
like, there's, the work that big techs do, or the software engineers do, have changed dramatically across the last 10 years. The tools that they use, the skills that they need to have. But it seems like the hiring process was not that different. And the only difference was that it was easy lead code from before, when the job market is geared more towards the job seekers, and now it's geared towards the companies. It's just getting more difficult lead code question, that kind of stuff. Which is I wonder if there's a company, a big tech, that can set an example to a new form of recruiting.
I really hope so. I mean, truth be told, I haven't interviewed at that many big tech companies due to my natural inclination of not do leak code. I have people who are I have friends who are generally traumatized by leak code, right?
Right.
It's not, if you really want to prep for it, if you have the time and, have zero social life, then maybe sorry, I know you're probably doing leak code, John. You do have a social life. You do hang out.
Yeah.
But I just find it a bit of an overkill. I think there's a lot that you can get out of a person without having that person go through a 8-step recruitment process, or even like a 2-hour lead code session.
I mean, we grew up in Beijing, both me and Duanchen and I, and I think a huge part of our life as elementary school kids are just going to these after school, these tutoring classes, and you learn about like computational like math and
math Olympiads, right?
Yeah. Well, not those, but like just like local competitions, because if you score well, you get into like top schools, and a lot of those are just like remembering the pattern and try to recite them on the.
I mean, don't get me wrong, right? I have a lot of respect for people. People have special talents to do that. Like I'm kind of like in the middle, which sucks.
Right.
Like I'd rather be bad and then super good at like some other skills, but I'm just kind of sitting in the middle. There are people who are really, really good test takers, and they go on to, do significantly important things. But for me, I don't know if I gave this context. I grew up in Hong Kong. I did, Kumon, right? And and math Olympiads, and it was not really the type of things I would want to do again.
I guess like the point I try to make is that in the beginning, like it's meant to actually pick out the people who actually do have talents, right? And I do have like friends who are really talented. Like when I sit in the same classroom, it's like he's always like the top student, and I'm like right behind. So you see,
behind.
I'm right behind, but like I know, I know, but like it's like down, like inside, I know that there are certain things that just clicks for him, but not me. And and I think it's but when everyone is grilling on these common things, then it's hard to tell who has the real talent and who doesn't. Because, there's only maybe just like 0.01% of people who is actually the target, and then like you get the rest of people who are just like grinders.
Yeah.
Which what maybe companies need, but yeah.
Well, I think what's interesting is you also probably illustrated the differences between how the West and the East educates. Because I quickly noticed that, like in Hong Kong, everybody drills, right? You take TOEFL, SAT, GMAT, whatever test you want to do, like in order to go study in the Western society, and then or study back home as well. But test scores are even more important back home. And when I went to the U.S., and I remember hearing a lot of my friends say that they transfer from a Hong Kong high school and they were probably ranked like bottom 10 in Hong Kong, and then they go over to say UK or US. All of a sudden, they find themselves like top like 5 in high school in math, right? Because they're still learning, fractions or whatever while they really learn integrations. But what I quickly discover is once you get to university level, that's when people truly excel in university in the US or in the UK, because they teach people to understand rather to memorize patterns. And John, to your point, I think the top 0.001%, in the East truly understands and also recognizes the pattern, right? And very few people actually can do that.
Well, the friend's talking about, right? Like he's just like coding, like interesting stuff, like while in high school, when well, not high school, actually middle school. So like I just put it alone. It's like like that's cool stuff. Like he just did that all like in his free time. So
what is he doing now?
I don't know. I feel like he's probably a software engineer.
Yeah.
He went to a top school. By the way, he went to the same school that like Guanchen and like his parents and my mom do.
Okay.
Wow. Amazing.
Yeah.
Okay. I do feel like some people do have the intuition just coming out of it naturally that can easily understand and to group things together and to really dive deeper. Yeah,
absolutely.
I mean, I guess we each need to find our own intuitions.
You just like find what you like, right? Like, I think you're naturally good at what you have passion, and I think it's a symbiosis between passion and what you're good at.
Yeah, I mean, when you mentioned that, right, I was just thinking. Well, I was thinking my wife, because she has a natural inclination to learn languages, and she speaks 5 languages, and she started learning Cantonese when she met me, and now she can speak to me in full sentences and understood quite a bit.
That's impressive.
She's not there, but I find that very, very impressive, because I swear to God, I'm on Duolingo for like 230 days learning Indonesian, and I still do not know how to say my rice is burnt or open the door. I only know how to say I eat an apple. That's what I remember.
I think we're maybe naturally designed to be like more like ASIC, where we're really good at certain tasks. We have our own sins or flaws, and it's, I guess, the best for us to discover what we're good at and grow really hard down on that, because that's what made us a society and made us collaborate together. And that's what the AI is not good at. And like, I guess in a way also what made all these founders want to branch out to do different things. Like imagine like everyone's like good at everything, then you wouldn't have these pain points to solve. Right? And secondly, you wouldn't have that diversity in thinking into, hey, this is a startup I want to do, because I know the domain, I care passionately about it, I know how to solve it, versus some other people might have some other domain expertise or passion or knowledge.
I would argue, though, what I find interesting is I tend to think that I want to work on something I'm not good at. So I want to go very deep on something I'm not good at. And that's the whole reason why I actually went into coding or AI, because I'm naturally a very artistic person. because I play piano. I used to perform in ballet. I sing in showers, right? I'm very musical. I like to draw, and I feel like a small part of my brain is logical, right? But it is because I recognize that, so I want to develop that, and that's why I pivoted. And one could argue, hey, maybe I could have been a musician, or one of my friends is actually very, very successful film scorer in Hong Kong, and he wrote the film scores for like the top, I don't know, 3 grossing movies in China, right? So for me, it's like maybe if I developed more, then I would have been quite successful in the music industry. But I would argue, some people are also actively trying to branch into fields that they're unfamiliar and try to develop that. And they could do all right, but I agree. There's a natural boost if you're good at something.
I shared the sentiment because I was a total nerd before high school. That's
what
all
are you
do
now,
more.
Johan?
I don't know. I'm a mix. I've been always like looking at these sort of like in the middle, like curriculum or it's like just how can you put both art, creativity, and technical advancement together. I don't know if that's going to be a trend, but I saw like Pika Labs, like they've been doing a lot of things. I don't know if that's what you guys think where the AI trend will lead us, right? Because we have code assist, we have people who are helping with documents, and now maybe there's some artistic parts that can be boosted by AI.
Yeah. I think even in the UK, I know this founder who started a company called Exactly AI. I think they generate AI art. And I suppose back when GAN was quite popular, I tried to generate some art as well. There's this guy called Robbie Barrett or something like that. He generated some art. Now one wouldn't call it art, right? Once they see DALL-E, right? It's just a bunch of splash paints, and then he kind of exhibit. So I think it definitely branches into that domain. But for me is, I don't know. I still value human art, even though it's kind of, ironic that I come from the world of generative AI and, generative art, right? I still see a lot of value in that, in human art.
Yeah, regarding art, in the past, actually since ChatGPT and DALL-E and all that came out, there's just a lot of tension between artists and LLM or AI generally.
Yeah.
I did hear this saying, I forgot from who, but it was saying that if an art can be replaced by AI, it's not art at all.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know how I feel about that, but I do see that right now, if I see art and I see it's painted by someone and it has a story behind it, I value it slightly more than before.
Yeah.
Before is everything has a story, everything is painted by a person, but now it seems like the person put in the effort and time and to share the space with these art. That's something that I think means more than before.
I think there's like similarity between art and coding in a way that when you start out, right? For example, like I try to do some camera work. So when you start out, you focus on the implementation. Say, for example, in camera, you focus on, what sort of camera you use, what sort of lens you use, what sort of film stock you use, how to load it. And in coding, you care about the implementation. Hey, should I do it this way? Should I do it that way? But maybe because I have since grown older and care less about these implementation details, I start to realize it's the actual person, the actual intentionality behind it that makes it a masterpiece. It's about what sort of story you want to tell, like how does this part of technical details contribute to the whole bigger idea of it. It's the idea that fascinates people. Same thing with software. It's not about what language you write it in, what machine you run it on, but actually what end goal you try to achieve with it, and how efficient, how each part serves its purpose of the pain point, the goal that you set out to solve, and and that's a human story.
Yeah, I suppose that's like, I think you've hit the point, right? Like, if an art is generated like throughout a very intricate process, like for example, if there's what sort of paint you use, right? What sort of medium you paint it on? What's the story, right? Versus maybe some kid behind the keyboard typing, "Hey, generate me a classical painting that talks about blah blah blah." Like, to me, the first one has more value simply because there's more effort and sort of a process that puts into it. So it's almost like the art itself is the whole process, plus the final piece is just part of the art, right? The whole art is the work of generating that piece of art. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
And that's why I think human art has more value. But
yeah.
Do you want to share, like, do you feel comfortable like sharing any of the market takes, or
sorry, you mean like as in the
like
market
how the
that we're in?
market goes, or like how the investment and stuff?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I think the market our startup is in is quite saturated. Like legal tech, right? Tons of good big companies are already established. I mean, I would mention also, same with my main job, right? My main job is with a marketing loyalty platform company, and that's a very saturated market on its own. But what's good about it is my main job's company is big enough, right? And they've established their footprint since, I don't know which year they started, like 2008, and through a bunch of acquisitions, they've grown very, very big. So for them to build a name, it's not too hard because they have existing clients that they can tap into. But for us, it's hard, right? For like a stealth startup that's in legal tech, right? We don't, we're still trying to focus on building the product, but B, how do I even get my friends to use it, right? I told my mom, I was like, this is what I'm building. And she was like, you ask someone else to use it, right? I'm like, man, I can't even get my mom to use it, so how am I going to get someone to use it, right? So for me, it's also, tough in that I think it's, in a lot of areas, it's quite saturated. So it's not like I invented a solution to, I don't know, like to make corns grow 3 times as quick, right? So that would be a very good niche to tap into.
Yeah.
But I feel like legal tech is quickly saturating. So there's a lot of competition.
So do you feel like you're fighting with time?
Fighting with time, yes. And, honestly, right, since I work full time, I cannot dedicate all my time onto the startup. But for me, it's also about the process as well. So, if I don't succeed, which, there's a 50% chance I won't, at least I learned a lot from it, because I feel like a lot of people always had a gate in their mind and be like, I can't do this. Once you push past it, at least you try. Hey, I have done it. Maybe I haven't done it this time, but eventually maybe I'll do it.
I'm building something that you're passionate about is also therapeutical in a way, right? And then I guess a lot of people I've talked to, they're like, oh, I'm not sure if I want to build or not. Is that I think it's a little about market timing. Everyone's trying to see how, the market is going to be, so that I guess for you guys, you're sort of culminating when the market is calm, so that maybe like a year or two down the line, when we have a hot funding market, then you already have customers, and it's the time for you to shine.
Yeah, I suppose so. I mean, to be honest, me and my co-founder, we, like I said, had no startup experiences. We just worked at companies, right? And he's a lawyer, so he worked at law firms. All we see is a problem, and all we see is a bunch of people having the same problem. So, and all we see is this problem will not be impacted by whatever the macro is. So maybe 10 years later, if nobody solves the problem, it will still exist. And even if someone tries to solve the problem, it will still exist for some people. So we're trying to get a slice of the market before it gets too divided into by a lot of,
or dominated market. I think
dominated market, yeah. So but again, right, it goes back to legal tech and hallucinations, right? How do you make people trust it? So that's our USP, I guess.
Yeah. How do you evaluate the problem? Is the size is enough for you guys to tackle, or is it too big for you to tackle? How do you kind of trickle down? I know you cannot share much on exactly what you're building, but just general.
Well, we did speak to people, right? We did speak to some seasoned investors. I have a lot of sort of VC connections in the UK or in the US that were happy to speak to me offline without like an investment lens. So they sort of said that, hey, you need to, it's a very generic advice, right? But it works. So you need to find your niche and an area where, you have a lot of people will adapt, but also not people, not saturated in a way that people have done that multiple times.
Makes sense.
So, yeah. I mean, it's just, I think right now it's kind of hard. I don't see, John and I occasionally talk about the cost of living in London, right? So I don't see how one can build a startup while bootstrapping while not having a main job. So, I think having that main job is super important to me. And ultimately, right, I view my startup as sort of a hobby right now.
Right.
And, I also have other hobbies like, playing with Rubik's Cubes or going to classical music concerts. So,
so
like
jealous.
John.
You
have hobbies too.
You have crazy Rubik's Cube collection. You gotta see one.
If I should show my house to everyone, but I've got all my Rubik's Cubes here. So I've got some crazy ones. For those who know me, I've got Rubik's Cubes collections.
Were you able to assemble them?
That's a very good question.
What things do you do with them, basically? Do you just collect them?
No, I solve them.
Okay.
I mean, to be honest, like the square ones, there's a pattern to it. So if you know how to solve a regular 3x3, then you just have to learn a little bit of algorithm to put them back together as a 3x3 and solve them, right? But for the weird ones, like I have some that shape shifts, then, you need to get it back to the regular shape and then you need to move the color pieces. So for me, it's a way to train my brain to be more logical because, like I said, I'm not a logical person. So I want to train my brain to think logically.
You're quite logical to me.
Nope. I'm sometimes, I forgot what my, what do you call that? Myers-Briggs, right? I forgot what my Myers-Briggs was.
Yeah,
but
personality.
I remember the first time I did it, I wasn't like a logical person. I forgot which attribute it was.
I mean, I think also the other hobby you do is retail trading, right? Like we both do. So
I don't know what you call it, Jahan.
It's retail trading, but like I mean,
one would say it's gambling, right?
Yes and no.
Gambling
like
in
you
a
have
tax-free investment account.
Well, the thing is that I think what you're doing now with startup is that you're just like waiting for the right opportunity, right? Like you're sizing it up. You know what my position should be. How much confidence do I have in it? Should I try a little bit to see how the market reacts?
Yeah.
And there's no like it's not like 0 or 1. It's not binary, but it's a spectrum, and you're just like trying to see how comfortable you are with different things.
Yeah, I mean, I always find that fun, but it wouldn't be like a full-time thing for me. Like it will be a good. I have friends who are very successful, right? They traded from a relatively small sum of money, right? To like millions. But I recognize I'm not that kind of person, nor do I have dedicated time for that. So,
but it helps you to build some conviction into whatever you do, I guess.
Sure, it does. I think
it's what you need to build a startup.
I still feel like it's a hobby in the end. I mean, I have stocks that I truly like care about, and I truly believe in those companies that I invested in will succeed. But ultimately, I'm not like an investment professional, right? I trade a relatively small amount of money compared to the big funds. But I feel like it's a good way to learn about the economy as well. Yeah, I don't know.
Well, you have like high convictions, and that's why I think like you also have high convictions in your startup, whatever you do.
Yeah, you need to, well, like you said, right? Whatever you do, like even if you don't have a startup, like if you just work 9 to 5, you need to have a conviction. Like why? I mean, I feel like nowadays a lot of people, and well, I sound like a boomer when I say this, but like I feel like nowadays a lot of people would be like, oh, I want to work a 9 to 5, and then just, or even matter of fact, a lot of people don't want to work, right? Like what do you call it in China? Like tang ping.
Like lay flat.
Just lay flat, right? Don't do anything.
It's like
which
quitting,
makes a lot of sense. But for me, it's always like I need a purpose, right? I need a purpose to wake up in the morning. I need a purpose to do this. So if working at a company, why am I working at this company, right? Even if I'm underpaid, right? Then hey, maybe my purpose is to work until I find a better deal. And what can I get out of my current environment is maybe learning opportunities. So
that's what I heard a lot from people working at big tech like Fang. I met someone working at Meta or just started, and they're like, Meta's great. If I've also been working at startups, but now I'm at Meta. It felt that I still have a lot of autonomy into what I want to do, and we felt aligned with whatever the team is trying to accomplish. Versus like people been talking about like Amazon before you start recording, like people just hate on Amazon and how they do certain things. I think it's a culture. Having conviction, holding on to it, tying your activities to that. It's a culture thing. It's like art.
I think with a little bit of luck as well. Like for myself, it took me a while to find a company like my current company, like my main job, right? My current company is very, I would say it's very supportive for my growth in my role as well as my skills. So they do let me shine where I can shine. And if I ask for new opportunities, I don't get all of them, but for the ones that I get are very important to my career growth. And, obviously they compensate me at least market rate. So, I feel like those are the companies that people tend to stick around longer. And, being in tech, I think most people are like, okay, after a year, you can jump and go to a different company, right? But if you find a good enough company that, helps you grow, I feel like I can easily stick around for 5 years. And that's what happened, because you're working, but you're also enjoying what you're doing. You just forget about time.
I think that's maybe how, I don't know, how you should approach startup in the first place. I read about, I guess people in Silicon Valley, right? Like, when people start in garage and whatever, it's just a bunch of geeks.
It's a long time ago then.
Well, it's a long time ago, like when people didn't actually know you can bring a lot of money. And people were just doing, like, people were just playing around with computers because they're fun. And with, same thing with a lot of these quant hedge funds as well. Like, people were just doing it for fun. And then like people see, hey, there's a lot of money, and then all the joys are killed.
It's always a debate, though, right? And I feel like some people go in for both, right? For passion, and it makes a lot of money. I would love to be a pioneer in an area, but unfortunately, I think the areas that I'm interested in, it's quite saturated, and people have pioneered. I do think that there might be a chance I'll pivot into the music industry at some point and apply AI, right? There's a lot of opportunities there, obviously.
If you want to do anything,
if you don't notice.
Hey, there we go. Nice. Perfect. Well, we should do another thing on the side, Just
we should start a band.
Start a band. Yeah, absolutely.
I think I met someone working at Bloomberg who did music, like technology or something.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you create music with tech.
Yeah.
It's a booming area, I think.
Yeah, there are a few of my friends actually working on using Gen AI for music, creating like short clip music for short videos or even longer form for movies. I don't think the longer form is doing so well at the moment, or at least the ones that I see it's public. But for short videos, like really high beat, that kind of stuff, it's getting there. Yeah.
I think the first example I ever saw was I can't remember if it's Huawei or some Chinese company finished the Unfinished Symphony, right, by Mahler. And that was weird because it didn't sound like Mahler or whatever the composer was. It didn't sound like him, but it was beautiful. So I'm like, holy crap, this is, maybe this was 2 years ago, and I bet it's improved. And I feel like we can, create variations of, Mozart or Brahms or whoever, like even, Snoop Dogg, right? We can create variations of different music.
I like them.
Yeah. So there's definitely a lot of things that can be done in that area. I just wish we all can live until we're like 500 so we can do all the things we want to do.
This podcast is for informational purposes only and is not intended as financial or investment advice. We do not guarantee the accuracy, completeness, or timeliness of the information presented. This podcast is not an offer or solicitation for the purchase or sale of any financial instrument. Thank you for subscribing and see you again soon.